He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But in that moment, stranded and sweating under a Mississippi sun, Charles Whitmore had never felt so useless. It was the kind of heat that melted patience, a dry, humming heat that turned the inside of his luxury sedan into a slow-cooking oven. The air conditioner struggled, his phone had no signal, and the rear passenger tire of his car sat completely flat against the dust-caked road. Charles tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, annoyed, frustrated. Not because he didn't know how to change a tire, he didn't, but because things like this weren't supposed to happen to people like him. He was Charles Whitmore, 75 years old, retired tech mogul, founder of 3 Fortune 500 companies. He was used to problems being solved by a phone call, a check, or a team of people trained to make his life seamless. But that afternoon, he was just a man in the middle of nowhere with a useless smartphone and a very expensive, very stuck car. Then, he saw him, a kid, maybe 13, walking along the side of the road like he belonged there. Dark skin, wiry frame, worn-out sneakers kicking up little clouds of dust. His t-shirt was faded, his backpack hung low, and yet he walked like he had somewhere to be and no time to waste. Charles squinted through the windshield as the boy slowed, looking at the car, then at the man inside. "Flat tire?" the boy asked, his voice steady and clear. Charles hesitated. He wasn't sure what to make of the boy, wasn't sure if he was being sized up or offered help. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Looks like I'm stuck." The boy nodded once. "Can help. My uncle owns a body shop. I've done it a dozen times." Before Charles could respond, the boy had already dropped his bag and crouched beside the tire. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't hesitate. He just moved, like someone who understood the value of time. Charles popped the trunk, watched from the shade of the car as the boy, hands dusty and sure, pulled out the jack, the wrench, the spare, and got to work. For the next 10 minutes, Charles said nothing, just watched. The boy didn't boast, didn't ask questions, just tightened bolts with the kind of confidence born from necessity, not instruction manuals, and something about it, the quiet competence, the lack of ego, felt deeply unfamiliar to Charles. When the job was done, the boy wiped his hands on his jeans and stood up. "You're good to go," he said, brushing dust from his palms. Charles reached into his wallet, a reflex more than anything, and pulled out a crisp 50. "Here," he said, "for your trouble." The boy glanced at the bill, then at Charles, then shook his head. "I don't need anything. Just glad I could help." Charles blinked. "Are you sure? You didn't have to stop?" "You looked like you needed help," the boy said simply. "That's enough." And before Charles could protest again, the boy was already walking off down the road, shoulders back, pace steady, like it had all been no big deal, but to Charles, it was. He sat in his car for a long time, the air conditioner now cold against the sweat on his neck, the engine ready, the road ahead clear, but something held him there. It wasn't just the boy's skill, it was his dignity, the way he refused money without rudeness, the quiet confidence that felt earned, not taught. As the boy's silhouette grew smaller in the rearview mirror, Charles felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Respect, curiosity, and the unsettling sense that, for the first time in a long while, he'd been the one on the receiving end of a lesson. Charles Whitmore had lived a long time, long enough to know that most people didn't do anything without a reason, especially not for free, especially not for someone they didn't know, but that boy, Malik. He hadn't asked for a name, hadn't asked for money. He'd helped, smiled, and walked away, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, back at his estate, a sprawling property with floor-to-ceiling windows and a 6-car garage, Charles sat alone in his high-back leather chair. The lights were dim. The steak on his plate had gone cold. The bourbon in his glass tasted dull, and the only thing on his mind was a boy in hand-me-down shoes and dust-covered jeans. He replayed the moment in his head, the flat tire, the quiet confidence, the way Malik had refused the money with a tone that wasn't arrogant, just sure. It wasn't just the help that had stuck with Charles, it was the grace, the ease with which the boy had given something without expecting anything in return. That kind of character didn't come from luck. It came from somewhere, from someone. And Charles realized he wanted to know where. The next morning, he was behind the wheel of his car again, not headed to a board meeting, not to a golf course, just back to that road, the stretch of sun-baked gravel where the boy had appeared like a quiet miracle. He drove slow, scanning the shoulders, watching the edges of the trees, the bends in the road. But Malik was nowhere to be seen. At the next gas station, he asked the clerk. Just a kid, about 13, walks a lot, knows how to fix a tire. The man shook his head. No clue. Same at the diner. Same at the hardware store. Most people shrugged. A few asked why he was looking. Then, at a corner store on the edge of a dusty crossroads, an older woman behind the counter leaned in. "Sounds like Malik Johnson," she said. "That boy's always fixing something. Lives out in Greystone, with his mama. Little blue house past the post office." Charles nodded. "Thank you." He drove there next, following cracked roads and faded signs until he saw it. A small, slanted house with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and a dusty yard littered with bike parts and empty planters. Nothing fancy, but it looked lived in, cared for. He sat in his car for a moment, watching the front door, unsure of what he was even going to say. All he knew was that he couldn't let it go. So he stepped out, walked to the door, knocked twice. A woman answered. Mid-30s. Tired eyes, a kitchen towel in her hands. "Can I help you?" Charles cleared his throat. "Good morning. I'm sorry to bother you. I believe I met your son yesterday. He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, then pride. "That sounds like Malik. He wouldn't take anything from me," Charles said. "Didn't want a reward. Just walked away." She smiled. The kind of smile that said that's just who he is. "That's my boy," she said. "Always looking to help." She stepped aside. "He's out back. You're welcome to say hello." Charles hesitated. He wasn't used to being invited into people's homes, not without a gate code or a calendar, but something about her voice left no room for formality. He nodded, stepped inside, and crossed a threshold into something he hadn't felt in years. Genuine warmth. The house was small, worn at the edges, patched with care, and filled with the scent of warm bread and something faintly floral. Maybe lavender. Or lemon soap. It was nothing like Charles's mansion. And yet, somehow, it felt more alive. Family photos lined the hallway. Some crooked, some faded. In one frame, a younger Malik grinned, missing 2 front teeth and holding up a handmade trophy that said, "Most helpful." Charles smiled without meaning to. She led him through the kitchen, past a small table with mismatched chairs and a paper towel roll standing in for a napkin holder. "He's out back," she said, motioning toward a screen door. Charles stepped. Outside, there, bent over a leaning fence with a hammer in hand and a tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, was Malik. The boy looked up, surprised. "Hey, mister," he called. "You find another flat tire?" Charles chuckled. It was the first real laugh he'd had in weeks. No, not this time. Malik wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over, squinting slightly in the sun. "What are you doing here?" Charles shrugged. "I wanted to thank you. Properly. What you did, it meant something to me." Malik tilted his head, confused. "I just changed a tire. You helped a stranger and didn't ask for anything. That's rare." Malik shrugged, again like it was nothing. "If someone's stuck and you can help, you help. That's what my mom says." Charles looked around the yard, the fence patched with scrap wood, the swing set rusted and leaning, a plastic chair with one leg propped up on a rock. This wasn't a place full of things, but it was full of values. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Charles said. Malik smiled. "My mom says that too. Usually when I'm not being a pain." They both laughed. The screen door creaked, and Malik's mother stepped out, again drying her hands on her apron. "You're welcome to stay for lunch, Mr. Whitmore. It's just leftovers, but there's plenty." Charles hesitated. He couldn't remember the last time someone invited him to stay. Not for business, not for a deal, just to stay. "I'd like that," he said. Inside, the table was already set. A chipped pitcher of iced tea, plates that didn't match, and food that smelled like comfort itself. They ate together, the three of them. Malik talked about school, his dream of becoming an engineer, how he loved to take things apart and figure out how they worked. His mother shared stories of the neighborhood, of how folks looked out for each other when no one else did, and Charles listened. Not just politely, truly listened. Because what he heard wasn't small, it was rare. Honesty without bitterness. Hardship without complaint. A life built not on having, but on helping. After lunch, they cleared the table together. Charles stood beside Malik's mother at the sink. "You've done a remarkable job with him," he said quietly. She looked at him, surprised by the softness in his tone. "He makes it easy," she replied. "We've had our struggles, but we've learned to see the good where we can." Charles nodded, the weight of her words settling in. "You've reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago." And as he left their home that day, he wasn't thinking about how different their worlds were. He was thinking about how his world, with all its comfort and control, had somehow felt emptier than this one. And for the first time in years, Charles Whitmore wasn't planning his next investment. He was planning how to give something back. The next morning, Charles Whitmore did something he hadn't done in years. He made phone calls, not to investors, not to board members, not to anyone who cared about margins or market trends. He called contractors, suppliers, old colleagues who still owed him a favor or two, and when they asked what this was about, he didn't give them a pitch. He just gave them a name. It's for a boy named Malik. By noon, there was a plan. By the next day, there were trucks on the road. And within a week, there was a crew standing in front of Malik's home, unloading wood, shingles, paint, and plans. Malik and his mother stood on the porch, speechless. "You didn't have to do this," his mother said, her voice trembling. Charles looked at her, his expression open and steady. "You've done more than get by. You've raised a young man who helped a stranger without hesitation. That's worth more than any check I've ever written. Let me return the favor." Malik said nothing at first, just stared at the trucks and the workers and the stacks of materials now filling their modest yard. Charles walked over, knelt slightly so they were eye level. "You taught me something, Malik. That helping people isn't about wealth. It's about showing up. Let me show up for you." Over the next several weeks, the transformation began. The sagging porch was rebuilt with sturdy, sanded wood. The broken swing set was taken down and replaced with a new one gleaming in the sun. The roof was repaired, the kitchen upgraded, the cracked windows sealed, the faded walls given fresh, vibrant life. At first, Malik kept trying to help. Carrying planks, sweeping sawdust, asking questions the workers didn't mind answering. One of them, a thick-armed man named Joe, noticed Malik watching intently. "You want to learn how to measure this right?" he asked, handing Malik a tape measure. Malik's face lit up. That was all the invitation he needed. Before long, he was holding tools, marking boards, and asking the kinds of questions only someone with genuine curiosity could form. "How do you know where to cut? Why does the angle matter? Can you teach me to use that?" Charles watched it all unfold from the driveway, clipboard in hand, pretending to focus on delivery logs. But really, he was just watching a spark catch. Fire. The same kind of fire he remembered having once, before life became too much about winning and not enough about building. Every day, Charles drove out to Greystone. Not because he had to, but because it started to feel like the one place that made sense. The boy, the family, the kindness, and the quiet joy of knowing he wasn't just fixing a house. He was investing in something far more valuable. Weeks passed. What was once a weathered house on the edge of town had become something else entirely. The porch no longer sagged. The roof no longer leaked. Fresh paint wrapped the house in warmth, like it had finally exhaled after years of just holding on. But the biggest change wasn't in the walls. It was in the air. Neighbors came by in waves, drawn not by curiosity, but by connection. They brought casseroles, loaves of banana bread, jars of jam. One elderly man dropped off a hand-carved rocking chair, said it belonged to his wife, and now it belonged to someone who'd keep the porch company. Children from the neighborhood played on the new swing set. Malik beamed as he pushed two kids at once, his laughter echoing across the yard like a song that had been waiting to be sung. Inside, the kitchen gleamed. The stove worked. The faucet no longer dripped. Elijah's mother stood in the center of the room one evening, running her fingers along the new countertop. "This isn't just a house anymore," she whispered. "It's a home." She turned to Charles, her eyes full. "I don't know how we can ever thank you." Charles shook his head slowly, voice soft. "You already have. You reminded me what life's supposed to be about. Not money, not power, just people." Outside, Malik crouched beside Joe, the contractor, carefully marking wood with a pencil, his face full of focus, his sleeves rolled up like he belonged to something bigger than himself. Charles watched from the porch, a cup of iced tea in hand, the sunlight bouncing off the railing they'd built together. "You've done more than fix a house," Malik's mother said gently. "You've given us something we haven't had in a long time. Hope." Charles nodded. "And you gave me something I didn't know I'd lost." On the final day of the project, the yard filled with neighbors. Someone brought folding chairs. Someone else brought a Bluetooth speaker playing soft gospel and blues. It wasn't planned, but it felt right. Malik ran from group to group, proudly showing off the freshly painted walls and the swing that no longer creaked. Charles stood on the porch, silent, watching, soaking in something far rarer than profit: belonging. He wasn't the rich man who showed up in a Mercedes anymore. He was just Charles, the man who stayed. The sun dipped low behind the hills of Greystone, casting a golden glow over the yard. The last of the workers packed their tools, and the hum of saws gave way to the rustle of trees and soft, tired laughter. Malik's mother stood beside Charles on the porch, handing him a glass of iced tea. Her voice was soft but clear. "You didn't just change our home. You gave us back something we thought we had to live without." Charles took a sip. The tea was sweet, the moment sweeter. "Funny," he said. "I used to think giving was about writing a check, but this feels like the first thing I've built in a long time." Behind them, Malik tore across the yard, his energy still boundless. He skidded to a stop, his face flushed, his eyes bright. "Mr. Charles," he said, catching his breath, "I've been thinking about what you did for us." Charles smiled. "Yeah," Malik nodded seriously. "I want to do something like that. One day. Help people, build things, make stuff better." Charles looked at him, steady. "You already did, Malik. You helped me. And you helped everyone who's going to walk through that front door from now on." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't ever lose that heart of yours. It's more valuable than anything you'll ever own." Malik grinned, that same easy, generous smile Charles remembered from the roadside. The three of them sat on the porch as the sky turned from gold to deep orange. No rush, no words needed, just the peace that comes when people connect, fully, honestly, without condition. When it was time to go, Malik and his mother walked him to the car. They didn't say goodbye, just see you later, because by now, they knew he'd be back. Charles drove slow, not because of the road, but because he didn't want to leave it behind just yet. He wasn't returning to an empty mansion. He was carrying something else with him now, something you couldn't buy or build. Purpose. In the weeks that followed, Malik's curiosity bloomed. Charles arranged for him to shadow Joe and the other contractors on weekends. Malik asked more questions than any of them could answer. And when he didn't understand something, he stayed until he did. Charles kept showing up, not just to watch, but to belong, to learn again what it meant to care without condition. And every time he left Greystone, he felt a little less like a visitor, and a little more like he'd finally found home. The story ended where it began, not with a flat tire, but with a simple act of kindness. One boy, one moment, and a man who had everything, except the one thing he didn't know he was missing. It started with a flat tire, a simple moment. One boy, one choice. But what happened next? It changed more than a day. It changed lives, because kindness doesn't ask for anything. It just shows up. Quiet, honest, unshakable. Malik didn't have wealth. He didn't have status. He didn't need either. What he had was heart. And that was enough to remind a man with everything what truly matters. Charles Whitmore thought he was the one offering help. But in the end, it was Malik who gave him something far greater. A reason to care. A place to belong. A purpose to return to. In a world where so many walk past each other, Malik stopped. He saw someone in need and acted. No cameras, no reward, no agenda. Just one act of goodness that rippled into something far bigger than either of them. Imagined. If this story moved you, share it. If it reminded you what really matters, hold on to it. And if it made you believe that real change doesn't take millions, just one honest moment, then remember this. The world doesn't change all at once. It changes in small places, quiet towns, worn porches, and the hearts of people who choose to help.